This is Marcus Washington from Making the Cut with your Maryland NCAA preview. Tonight, we're going to also have Herbert Sewell on. He's going to talk about Maryland and the season. But just to kick it off, they have to play UConn Saturday night at 7:10 p.m. And we're looking forward to it. Maryland being back in the tournament. It was always great when you have the locals come in. So without further ado, we're going to bring in Herbert. And we're going to talk a little bit of Maryland basketball. How you doing tonight, Herbert?
Hey man, how you doing? Thank you. First and foremost, thank you for having me on. I'm building the following on Fansided, so this is awesome. I got a lot of folks watching. So
yeah, awesome. First of all, let's take a look back at Maryland's regular season. What was the biggest thing that sort of surprised you in a good way? And maybe what were some of the things that you thought they would be better at that they weren't as good at?
Well, I think anybody that's watched the Terps this year in comparison to last year knows that they lost a lot with Anthony Cowan and Jalen Smith rolling out. That was essentially those two guys, one's a just cold-blooded point guard, could get buckets whenever he wanted to get them. And he was about as clutch a point guard as Maryland has had in recent history, not discounting what Melo's done. But I think this season, the fact that there wasn't really a lot in the way of post presence, the traditional post presence that we're used to seeing from Maryland really hurt early in the season. And it took the roster there and Coach Turgeon and those guys a good bit of the season trying to figure out what their identity was and, what they could really hang their hat on, which was really interchangeable defense, just switching at every opportunity on the defensive end and half court. And I think for the most part, they've done a really good job with the roster construction as it is right now. Obviously, it's not the same dynamic that it was last year. You had two go-to scorers in the clutch. This year has been like scoring by committee. Got a really solid core of players that are interchangeable 1 through 4, with Eric Ayala and Aaron Wiggins and Daryl Morcell and Donta Scott. Donta Scott's probably the most important guy on the roster as it stands because that dude alternates between 4, 5, and 3 at any given point in time during the game. So I think in terms of what they've done well in the latter part of the season, defensively, they locked in. They locked in during the second part of the season. They really started shutting people down in half-court situations, really limiting post-entry passes, limiting post-scoring opportunities when there wasn't a really big size advantage, and really increasing how they pressured on the perimeter. I think that was really big.
Yeah, and one of the things about not having that big, and that has impacted them, because at least when they had Bruno Fernando, you had that sort of that rim protector that allowed the perimeter to play so aggressively. I think Maryland was one of the teams in the Big Ten that was hurt by not having fans. I mean, usually that place is rocking when there's a Big Ten game in there. I thought that they missed them a little bit, even though their bench did do a pretty good job at trying to stay active. I think they really were hurt without having the fans. So I can't have you on without asking you about the whole Michigan thing. Just the thing with Turgeon and Juwan Howard and the back and forth. And those 3 games just this year from the very beginning, the game out at College Park where Hunter Dickinson wanted to kind of make it his own personal homecoming party. And he did do a whole bunch of woofing and talking, not only on the court, but then to the media afterwards, still saying Maryland didn't recruit him as hard as he would have liked to have been. What were your impressions about what happened from some trash talk in the first game to where we got to in the Big Ten tournament?
Be quite honest, man. I'm still really shocked to see that kind of that kind of dynamic from any kids coming out of DeMatha, in regards to just chirping about not being recruited. I don't think that was not the case. And a lot of people that I've talked to that were connected in terms of, Maryland staff and their recruiting targets. They really heavily recruited this kid. And he made it apparent early in his recruitment that he wasn't interested in Maryland. So, during that point, they stopped recruiting and they went along their way. And what's kind of bothersome about this whole situation is that, if you're a coach, and you're a coach, obviously, you're a coach, your energy is focused on your team, period. The chirping and stuff between players, yes, that happens. But if you're a coach, your responsibility is to limit all of that stuff and to not, and to not engage in it. And the thing that really bothers me about the entire situation is that there seems to have been a lot of that in the first two games, in terms of not just Hunter Dickinson chirping at Maryland, or for whatever reason he was kind of making up, but the fact that you had a bona fide nationally, coach with a high profile nationally encouraging it, and that's what it appears to be, And I think the presser, when it came to the head in the tournament, come on, dude, you're 6'9", 250, and you're talking about, a 56-year-old, coach that's barely 6 feet, short, charging you. Come on, that's not going to fly. And I think ultimately, fans that look at that stuff, obviously Michigan fans are going to roll with their coach because, he's iconic in their program. But just in terms of a distraction standpoint, nobody really wants that kind of distraction.
Do you think there's any truth, even though it's kind of been debunked, that Coach Turgeon made references to banners coming down? Because in his post he did say he's done it right for 30 years, almost like a little shot in and there.
I don't doubt that he was chirping, but I don't think he made the statement that's been floating around the Twitterverse and the interwebs, about the banners and not being. Come on, Turgeon's been as squeaky clean of a coach as you can possibly get, for the time he's been here. During his career, and I think folks that follow Maryland basketball. I think a lot of the fan base, wishes he had a little bit more of an edge because, we had, he's succeeding, one of the edgiest in a good way coaches that we, that this program's had that just built the program in Gary Williams. So, I think in my opinion, it's much ado about nothing in terms of that whole entire situation. But in terms of recruiting, I think there's a lot to be said about that dynamic, particularly in Maryland circles when it comes to local recruiting. Places like DeMatha, other places in the WCAC, where a lot of talent comes out of DMV. So they've had success. They've had success at other schools. DeMatha, they're still trying to turn the key. So.
And I've said this many times, and this is not to defend all the local coaches, but there are times there are kids in the WCAC who say that they want to spend their 4 years outside of the DMV to go to college. So where these coaches get a lot of criticism of how didn't you get such and such, the truth of the matter is, sometimes these kids they don't want to stay. So it's not on the university or the coach or how hard they did or didn't recruit someone. It's just that the kid wanted to go somewhere, and there's nothing wrong with that. But let's not, it's just too much at times killing the coaches. But if we go to one of the most surprising things for me throughout the year that I thought didn't get a ton of press was Coach Turgeon's decision early on to move Hakeem Hart from a shooting guard position to the point guard. And I thought it took Hart some time to get used to that. What did you think about that move?
I think it was twofold. I think it was done out of, I don't want to say desperation, but out of intense necessity, because he wasn't getting the backup point guard play that he wanted, out of Aquan Hart and out of Dockery, the Dockery kid. And I think Dockery's more of a scoring two. But yeah, the point guard, the point guard position has been in flux the entire season. And I think going into the season, all of us thought that Eric Ayala was just going to lock that down and just take over the position and inherited it. But it turns out that in certain situations against, specific matchups, particularly in the sense that we don't have, Maryland doesn't have that just go to throw it down on the block and let them go to work and work inside out type of presence. You need a different type of point guard in terms of that, being able to really value the ball, being able to really, get people into better positions, on the offensive end of the court, to get to their spots and so they can score. And I think the fact that he didn't see, we really didn't have that much on the bench in terms of, coming in and spelling that spot, really forced his hand. And I think, to my surprise, I've been really impressed with the way Hart has handled it. Right. Because he's not a point guard, obviously. He's not. No. But, his versatility has kind of really shown through. He's got a lot of potential in terms of his development, further on in his career at Maryland, to be able to play multiple positions and to be turned into an offensive player at the 2 or the 3 position that could, take on point guard duties and make plays. So
and the 2 transfers, Gavin Smith, Jarris Hamilton, they did get off the slow starts, which is understandable. You had COVID. They're transfers anyway. Then you have COVID. You don't really get the practice time. Are they right now where you thought they would be at this point when we get to the tournament?
Given the limitations of the roster, I think they are. I think they're rounding into shape. And I think now let me preface this by saying that given the way the roster is this year, there are always going to be some inherent weaknesses. Specifically, in half-court situations, scoring the ball, shooting from the outside, we're really, really spotty in that, in that context in terms of offense. What I've been really impressed with in terms of their team is the way they've really bought in defensively. Besides, teams that really, really overmatch them, size-wise on the block and really present vulnerability, just mismatches along the front line. If you're talking about teams that are comparable size in the Big Ten, they've shut teams down. And that has really impressed me.
So, with the upcoming opponent, being UConn, what was your initial reaction when you saw them in the game with UConn and with Alabama waiting in the wings?
To be quite honest with you, I think UConn is a very beatable opponent. They've got now. Before I go any further, they definitely got a pro in James Bouknight. James Bouknight is a legit first-round NBA type talent, and the guy can score at all 3 levels, and he's tough to deal with in transition. So, he changes UConn's whole offensive makeup, when he's on the floor, and the fact that they're getting him back helps them. Now, what I will say is that UConn is very similar to us in a lot of ways. They hang their hat on defense. They're not as big as we're used to seeing in the Big Ten, which may bode well for Maryland, for Maryland in terms of a matchup. Because, like I said, the teams that they've faced where, the matchups have been size-wise have been comparable, they've shut teams down. And they have really done so in a way, they communicate really well on defense. They switch, pretty much every opportunity in half-court situations. They defend the pick and roll extremely well. So those things are really things that stand out to me in terms of this matchup. R.J. Cole, which some folks that are from the DMV may recognize his name. He was a transfer. He was at Howard University. Yeah. Heck of a point guard. If they get some semblance of stuff, activity out of him, that might be a big problem. But size-wise, I see a lot of matchup favorability for the Terps, particularly, spots 1 through 3, because the length that we have in terms of those spots can really be, it's been disruptive all year, and I don't see any reason why it wouldn't be this game.
And the thing about RJ Cole, just to kind of get off the subject for a second, that Howard team had 3 guys who could fill it up when RJ Cole was there. I mean, people missed a treat if they did not watch Howard play when Cole was there, and they were really putting it up. They were something else on offense.
Yeah, absolutely. And just as a side note, I know we're talking about Maryland. I'm an HBCU guy. I grew up right down the street from Howard, and I went to school at Alabama State. Played a little bit. So the fact that you have kids coming from HBCUs that are transferring into higher programs, I know it was not just RJ Cole, but you had cats like James Daniel III. Previously, that dude was lighting it up when he was at Howard, and he transferred into another program. That should tell people, that should tell coaches, that encourage their kids, don't just limit your kids, to looking at the biggest schools that you could possibly look at. If you can play, you can play. And it doesn't matter where you go to. If you can play, and you're putting up numbers and you're doing well and you're really being, excelling at your craft, folks are going to find you. And the attendees are going to find the programs that you play at.
So one of the worries, getting back to the game, one of the worries that I've heard is Maryland does tend at times to go through these stretches where they don't score. That leads me to Aaron Wiggins, who I've begged at times to be even more aggressive than what he is, not to be necessarily a volume shooter, but to kind of hunt his spots on the courts a little bit better. How big do you think Wiggins is going into the game this week with UConn?
Huge. I call Aaron Wiggins the most enigmatic player in college basketball, simply because if he really puts everything together, I don't know of 10 shooting guards in the country that could really put defenses under pressure like he could when everything's clicking for him. He's had moments during his career where he's really, really got it. And he's not settling for the 3, he's picking his spots, he's pulling up in mid-range, taking what defense gives him. He's extremely athletic, but I think at times he really relies on the 3 too much, especially when he's not hitting it right away. He's really streaky. He'll settle for the 3. This year, he's done a lot better job in terms of, okay, I'm not hitting the 3. Let me see if I can use my athleticism, to get to the hoop. And I think that's kind of a recurring theme for that core, not just Aaron Wiggins. I think Aaron Wiggins is a real X factor. Aaron's on, that makes that squad that much more dangerous, that much more hard to defend. But that core, of Morsell, Wiggins, Scott, and Ayala, they all have the same types of traits. They can be extremely explosive at times offensively. Daryl is probably the most consistent kid that out of that crew, simply because, he kind of knows his limitations. He doesn't take a lot of 3s. He's very judicious in terms of his shot selection, and he's a dog. He can just operate in the paint, against big people a lot bigger than his size. He finishes extremely well, in the paint. And I think those types of factors are going to make a difference. And I think that's
go ahead. Not to interrupt you. The one thing I would really love to see is if RJ Cole does end up on Daryl Morsell, I would love to see Turgeon put Morsell on the post. I think that's a matchup that Maryland could exploit overall, or that they can exploit early on.
Absolutely. I think looking at UConn's guards, they're not, outside of Book Night, they're not really that big in terms of what Maryland's used to seeing. And the thing about Maryland's interchangeability is that they can invert that offense and put Morsell. They could put Aaron Wiggins on the block. They can even put Ayala, or in certain cases they could put Akeem Hart on the block, due to his length and size. So I think a lot of time, throughout that entire lineup, there's that versatility depending on what the matchups are. Like I said, I think the Poly kid from UConn, he's got a really good mid-range game. He might pose a little bit of a problem in terms of really extending that defense if he's really engaged and on. But I think on the offensive end, there's a really unique opportunity for Maryland to really exploit the guards and invert that offense. If not posting kids up, but taking them off the dribble and getting in the lane. I think. Mm-hmm. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh no, go ahead.
I think for the most part, particularly the way churches run that 4 out 1 in offense later in the year. If that floor gets spread and they're able to spread the floor, it's going to be a really big advantage for the Terps because you got at least 2 or 3 people that can handle the ball well enough to create their own shot. In terms of getting into the lane and just causing whatever kind of havoc they need to cause. Wiggins has shown a propensity, particularly late in the season, to get, to say, all right, the jumper's not working. I'm going to take you off the dribble. And, we've seen a lot of positive results from that. I think a couple of, a couple of games late in the season and in the tournament, they got to the line a lot. And they're, now they're starting to really convert those free throw attempts at a really, high rate. Unlike earlier in the year. Earlier in the year, those guys were, they weren't hitting shots and they weren't hitting free throws when they got the opportunity. So it's definitely something that bears observing going into this game.
For Maryland, if you had to complete this sentence, for Maryland to beat UConn, the most important thing they must do is X. What would X be?
Communicate defensively. That's what they've hung their hat on all year. I would say communicate defensively and be patient offensively. Take what the defense gives you offensively. Don't fall in love with the 3. Just don't. That's where a lot of the scoring droughts happen. In games that we've seen ill-advised shots, a couple of possessions, a couple of weaves, somebody pounding the ball at the top of the key, for the majority of the shot clock to end in a 3. You can't have that. Move the ball. I think ball movement is going to be really, really important as well because UConn doesn't play zone. They play most of their time. They play exclusively man to man, and I don't think Dan Hurley is going to change anytime soon doing that. So ball movement is going to be essential. Some of the offensive sets in terms of flex cuts and stuff they've installed in the offense going into the season, going later into the season has worked a lot. The back cuts to the hoop, those things have worked really well. And I think particularly if UConn is really aggressive in man-to-man, they're going to be vulnerable to back cuts. So I think those are some things to really look at.
If we allow ourselves to go ahead and get ahead, how does Maryland match up with Alabama?
That's a good one. I've seen the Alabama a couple of times, man. They are, how can I put it? Alabama is like Maryland with a really, really good big man and offensive firepower to spare. They share the ball a lot. They get out in transition. They generate a lot of offense off of their defense and in transition. And the thing about them, watching them this year, it's hard to slow them down. If you're not playing transition defense and you're not getting back, you're going to get killed. Herb Jones is I think that's Herb Jones. I know he's a Herbert.
No, you're right.
Yeah, Alabama's big man. He's a jack of all trades. And I think If Maryland, wins against UConn and matches up with those guys, I think they match up a little bit better with Alabama than people are kind of giving them credit for. Because again, Alabama's not a team with a really huge size differential in terms of spots 3 through 5, but they got a lot of cats that can just kill you outside and kill you off the dribble, and they pose a real challenge. If you can keep them out of transition, good. If not, it's going to be a long day.
So, like most of America, people do brackets. Do you have a bracket filled out? If so, who's your Final Four?
Wow, I'm still filling mine out, man. And to be quite honest with you, the only one I see that is, in my opinion, kind of a shoe-in is Gonzaga. I mean, I looked at that bracket, and I simply don't see anybody in that region that's going to challenge them. If they're doing everything that they're supposed to do, I think Gonzaga is going to be there. I think the way Illinois is playing, if Illinois is really doing what they need to do, I think they're going to be there. I'm not sold on Michigan. I'm not. And I say that not because they're not an effective team. They're one of the best teams I've seen all year. But without Livers, it takes a lot of flexibility away from them. And teams that have mobile posts that can really invert their offenses and bring the posts out, Hunter Dickinson's going to have a problem guarding those guys out in the perimeter. Right. And I think people are going to see that in certain matchups. Like if there's a potential Alabama-Michigan matchup down the road, if it gets to that point, I don't see Hunter Dickinson matching up well with Herb Jones. I just don't. He does. He's too athletic, and he does too many things.
And thoughts on App State, Norfolk State?
I think Norfolk State has a real chance of winning that game. Honestly, I've seen a lot of Norfolk State this year. They, in my opinion, ran through the majority of the CAA. I mean, they have a lot of quality out of conference wins for HBCUs, and they're tough. They're extremely gritty. They're another team that hangs their hat on the defensive end, and they've got really, really good guard playing Chavis, and they got a couple of New Yorkers that are running point and two. Their names escape me at the moment, but I was really impressed with them against Morgan because Morgan was loaded. Yeah. Lots of D1 transfers, and they had a lot of talent on that squad. I mean, honestly, if Morgan and Norfolk interchange with each other, I'd still say the same thing. Morgan is that talented. I think there's a really good shot for them to win.
Awesome. So, hey, man, thank you for joining me. It's great. I love having you on, and I always see you on Twitter. Just let everyone know what your Twitter handle is and where they can find you.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me first, man. I really appreciate it.
No problem.
For those of you that don't follow me on Twitter, I'm a college basketball contributor for Fansided's Bustin' Brackets platform. I can be found on Twitter at HHL Seward III. You can't miss me. I got an icon of Len Bias dunking the basketball. That's how you're gonna recognize me because I'm born and bred. So follow me on Twitter. Follow me on Instagram. I'm on Instagram as well. Same handle. Look for me on Fansided's Bustin' Brackets platform. I'm normally sharing articles, and just follow the tournament, man. I'm just happy the tournament's back. Basketball is back, and we're able to indulge in March again. This time last year, we were hurting. So,
yeah. No doubt. All right, thank you, man. I really appreciate you coming on.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you for having me on.
Sure, thanks. So that was, like I said, there was Herbert. contributes. Herbert Sewell the third contributes over at Fansided. And just a programming note: tomorrow we will be back on probably around 3:45, 4 o'clock. We're going to have Bobby Bancroft on and talk about Georgetown. Georgetown, their incredible run, and now facing Colorado in the first round of the NCAA tournament. Thank you for joining us tonight, and we'll see you again tomorrow.